Asalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, inshallah, today, this is a continuation of our series of sessions about the Ashara Mubashara, the 10 promised Jannah. So before I begin, I want to ask the audience, I want to make this a little bit interactive, but I want to ask the audience this. When you guys think of warriors in Islam, what comes to mind? Any names that comes to mind? Khalid bin Walid, okay.
Abu Jannah.
Abu Jannah, that's a good one. Okay. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. Okay, yeah. So I mean, as you guys mentioned, Khalid bin Walid, we mentioned Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, right? These are big names we mentioned. But today, we want to turn to a man who was equally courageous, who was equally steadfast, and who carried the sword of Islam from a very young age. A man whose story is filled with bravery, loyalty, and devotion. His name is Zubair Ibn Al-Awwam radiallahu anh. Now, this, to do it justice, we would need multiple sessions to cover the entirety of his life, his military campaigns, from his early life to his ending. But inshallah today I just want to cover a few key moments of his life and take some lessons we can take home today, inshallah. So who was Zubair, right? We mentioned, I kind of asked the audience, we mentioned Khalid bin Walid, Salahuddin, right? We know these kind of big names that come to our heads, right? But oftentimes we kind of forget Zubair, right? Who is Zubair? Zubair, in his own regard, was a unit, a tank. Amongst the Sahabi, he was one of the strongest, like Umar ibn Khattab, like Abu Bakr, like Khalid bin Walid. Now, Zubair wasn't an ordinary Sahabi. To begin, the Prophet ﷺ gave him glad tidings of Jannah while he was alive. Yeah? He was one of the Ashara Mubashara, the 10 companions promised Jannah. Now, imagine with certainty, that would guarantee. Well, most of us live our lives hoping that Allah accepts even one deed from us. These men were told from Rasoolullah ﷺ himself that you will be in Jannah. You are promised Jannah. And for Zubair, he was a pretty young man. Not only that, but when Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh when he was on his deathbed, he was appointed a council of 6 men to decide the future of the Ummah. Yeah? Zubair was one of those 6. Out of the 6 men to decide the future of the Ummah, Zubair was one of them. Now this alone tells us about his stature, his wisdom, and his trustworthiness. And perhaps most famously, he was the first person to ever raise a sword in defense of Islam. Now, I want to begin kind of, in his early life, a couple of highlights I want to bring up. I want to bring up the mother of Zubair, the influence of his mother, Safiya. Safiya was no ordinary woman. Known for her toughness and her dignity, she was determined to raise her son with strength in the harsh environments of Mecca, right? She disciplined him strictly. When her family complained that she was too harsh at times, she replied, I'm not torturing him. I'm raising him to be a man who will stand firm against the armies, who will stand firm against and bring back victory. Her vision proved true. Zubair grew into a fearless man in battle, unwavering in principle, and prepared to face any challenge. And we'll see and we'll touch upon this throughout his life. So in the early stages of Mecca, despite his noble lineage and his harsh upbringing, Zubair was not satisfied with the corruption and the injustices of society that he saw. And note, Zubair was very young. The ulama say he was anywhere between 12 to 15 years old at this time. And he viewed society, he viewed life, he viewed the Quraysh, and he wasn't happy with it. Like Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he saw the munafiqeen, he saw the oppression, he saw the backwardness of society. And what did he do? At a young age, at 15 years old, he rejected it. Through Abu Bakr, he heard the message of Islam and he accepted it. And I guess again we said around the age of 15, he was among the very first Muslims to enter the fold of Islam. But accepting Islam in those early days wasn't an easy task. As we kind of know the situation in Mecca, the early days of Mecca, how was the situation? Does anyone know?
Difficult.
Very difficult?
You were a minority stranger.
The Muslims were minorities, they were strangers, yeah? The Muslims didn't really have authority or power. Most of the companions, most of the Sahabah didn't have security or protection. It was a very scary time. Zubair's uncle, Nawfal ibn Khuwaylid, was known as the Shaitan of Quraysh. Does anyone know why he was known as the Shaitan of Quraysh? Yes.
He was one of the worst to the Muslims. He tortured them very severely.
He was known for his severe punishment, for his severe torture towards the Muslims, towards the believers, to the point that his very own nephew, Zubair, he took him. And we all kind of know the story about what happened to this. He took Zubair, 15-year-old child, boy. He wrapped Zubair in a mat, in a carpet, and he put a flame in front of his face. He put a fire in front of his face. And that suffocated Zubair. And all throughout he demanded his nephew to renounce the deen of Allah, to renounce the deen of Rasulullah. But what did Zubair say? What did he say back to his uncle? To an adult. He was a child at the time. He said, "No, by Allah, I won't return to polytheism ever again." Now let's think about this for a second. What results that a child, like a 15-year-old child, a boy, not even reached manhood yet, to stand in front of his uncle, to stand in front of an adult, a person of authority, and take a harsh stance of this defensive stance against him? What did Zubair carry in his heart that carried this conviction, right? He carried this covenant to Allah. This covenant is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, La ilaha illallah. Right? I want to take a step back and kind of look at this covenant. What does this mean, right? This aqidah, this principle, this creed, knowing that all my hardships, my pain, everything goes back to Allah. To Allah I came, to Allah I will return. And knowing this, he stood in front of his uncle and said, "I will never return back to worshiping false gods, to polytheism ever again." So this covenant is what really stood firm in his heart. And inshallah, we're going to go a little bit deeper dive into his life, and this will show throughout his life. But his screams echoed throughout Mecca, and but these are not screams of surrender towards his uncle, but rather they're screams of defiance. And even at 15 years old, his faith, his iman was unbreakable, unshatterable. So I want to relate a small story, and perhaps one of the most famous stories with Zubair. One day, Zubair heard a rumor that Muhammad ﷺ had been captured by the Quraysh, and he was to be killed. Without hesitation, Zubair, 15 years old, he seized his sword in his hand, and he rushed through the streets of Mecca. The Quraysh were shocked, right? Let's look at this in perspective. Zubair, a 15-year-old boy, he took a sword in his hand, and the Quraysh, these are men, these are adults, massive in stature, these are war chiefs. They were shocked looking at this boy, looking at Zubair. This fearless youth charging forward with steel in his hand, when he reached the Prophet ﷺ, he found him unharmed. The Prophet asked, "What are you doing with the sword of Zubair?" He replied, "I heard you were being attacked, so I came to strike anyone who touched you." SubhanAllah. The Prophet smiled. He prayed for him and blessed his sword. From that day, Zubair was remembered as the first man to raise his sword in defense of Islam. Now, let's think about this, right? Zubair was the first sword raised in Islam, in defense of Islam, 15-year-olds. And what do we know about the situation at that time? Mecca was, at this time, the Muslims did not raise arms to fight in the early days of the dawah. What do we know? What do we know the early days of the? What do we know Mecca to be? The Muslims, many of the Sahaba were unprotected. Yet, we see Zubair raising his sword against the injustices he saw. We know the status of the Muslims at that time was that they didn't have any power. They didn't have any authority. They were still under the rulership of the chieftains of the Quraysh. But we see Zubair, we see one of the 10 promised Jannah, he raised his sword against, he stood up. And why is this? I want to ask, why is this? Why do we see this? It's because Zubair saw the injustice in front of him and he took action. He saw the batil, he saw the evil, he saw the falsehood, and he took action even though he wasn't protected, even though he didn't have authority. Now, this doesn't mean we just take up arms, or we take up swords and we go and wave them around. This is not what that means. But what does this mean? I think we can take a note and take a note from this from his life. An example, let's look at the Muslims in Gaza today. Similarly, like the Muslims in Mecca in the early days of Islam, they didn't have, when it comes to a superficial level, they didn't have power. The Muslims in Gaza today do not have power. They don't have authority. But look, the Muslims in Gaza, the people with no power, with no authority, these are the lions of the Ummah. These men, women, and children, these mothers, these fathers, our brothers and sisters, these are the lions that take the step forward with steel in their hand against the colonial entity, the Zionist colonial entity, trying to persecute them. Like Zubair, with his taqwa, with his knowing, fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and knowing that carrying La ilaha illallah in his heart, he took this sword and he went with zero position of power, the authority. He went to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his defense. And we saw his reaction. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he smiled. And he dubbed him the first sword raised in Islam. Now, I kind of want to take a point of reflection here, but, likewise, we're in a state of, we don't have authority. We don't have a shield. The imam of, holding a shield in front of us, we don't have that in our day and age, in our current reality. Yet, we take examples from the Sahabah. We take examples from the Muslim, our brothers and sisters in Gaza, in Rohingya, in parts of the Muslim worlds that are being tortured, like the Muslims in Mecca that are being tortured. And they took this stance. Is because why? They had that covenant, they had that understanding of, to Allah they will return, and whatever harm, injury you attain throughout that process, in the eyes of Allah, that's a medal. Those are medals in the eyes of Allah. And we just want to know, as Muslims, it doesn't matter if we don't have security, authority. As Muslims, we stay steadfast to the truth, to the haqq. And what does that mean? If we see falsehood, to our capabilities, we stand against that falsehood. We stand against that the evil as best as we can, and we see that through Zubair. To cover some of his companionship, Zubair grew close with two other young companions, namely Talha ibn Ubaydullah and Ali ibn Abi Talib. They formed a trio of courage, of unity, and of iman. And like brothers in arms, they shared through the struggles. They learned through the house of Al-Arqam. And they stood beside the Prophet ﷺ at a very early age in their development, in the earliest days of the dawah. Both Az-Zubair and Talha would later be promised Jannah. And their friendship and loyalty endured through decades and until their death. Now, like I said, to kind of recap some of the main points of Zubair's life, and of course this will require multiple sessions to go into the very details, but I want to bring up kind of fast forward to the migration of Abyssinia. We know during the early stages of the dawah, the persecution got to a certain level, to a certain threshold, to the point where the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, he gave an opportunity for the Muslims to flee to migrate to Abyssinia for the time being. Yeah. And when the persecution worsened, the Prophet ﷺ instructed some Muslims to migrate. And among the few, was Az-Zubair. In Abyssinia, we see again he displayed his courage in an extraordinary incident. When a rival challenged Najashi's throne, the king of Abyssinia at the time, the Muslims at the time feared for their safety. So they needed someone to cross the river, the Nile River that separated the Arabian Peninsula and Egypt and Abyssinia to bring back news of the battle. Who volunteered for this? Zubair volunteered. With only a leather float, he swam across the body of water to observe the fighting. And he returned shouting, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, to announce Najashi's victory. His bravery reassured the Muslims and preserved their morale. A few years later, the return to Mecca and the marriage of Zubair. After some years, Zubair returned to Mecca and he married Asma bint Abi Bakr radiallahu anha, the daughter of Abu Bakr al-Siddiq. Their marriage was a union of two noble lineages and a household of courage. When the Muslims migrated to Medina, Asma, pregnant at the time, gave birth to Abdullah ibn Zubair, the first child born to the Muhajirin after the Hijrah. His birth, the birth of Zubair's first child, Abdullah, silenced some of the rumors that the enemies of Islam, that the Quraysh, spread in Medina, for example, the Muslims could no longer bear children. Now let's take example of this. Through Zubair's courage, through his willingness, he became a symbol of hope for the Muslims. So much so that the constant slander, the rumors from the enemies of Islam, the Yahud, the Quraysh, that through his actions, these were all disproved. I want to focus a little bit of Zubair's military legacy, right? His military life. Zubair's reputation rests largely on his role on the battles of Islam. It was said that no battle or raid ever missed him. It's quoted that plentiful were the stabs which his body had to receive and preserve even after the wounds had been healed. They were like medals telling of Zubair's heroism and glory. Let us listen to one of his companions who once saw and described these medals, which crowded each other over his body. While accompanying Zubair in one of his journeys, I saw his body spotted with sword scars. His chest was like hollow eyes due to the variety of stab wounds he endured. I said to him, I've seen on your body what I've seen never before. He replied, by Allah, I haven't received any one of these except while I was with Muhammad ﷺ and in the cause of Allah. In Badr, Zubair was one of the only two horsemen among the 300 and so Muslims against the hundreds of the Qurayshi armies, of their forces. And we can know that Zubair wore a yellow turban. He fought valiantly and suffered many wounds in this, but he was honored through when the angels descended onto the battlefield, imitating his turban, imitating the yellow turban. In Uhud, we see that when others fled Uhud, he remained at the Prophet's side, shielding him and fighting back relentlessly. During the Battle of Uhud, after the army of Quraysh had retreated towards Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ assigned him, together with Abu Bakr, to follow the Quraysh's army and to chase them so that they would realize how strong the Muslims really were, right? Abu Bakr and Zubair led 70 Muslims in this scrimmage. Although Abu Bakr and Zubair were chasing a victorious army, let's not get this wrong. The Muslims truly were the underdog in this battle, in this skirmish. The numbers were far less than the Quraysh. The army they were chasing were the victorious ones in number. But the military skill used by Abu Bakr and Zubair made the Quraysh, made the large army, made the victorious army, made them think that they were overestimated, and that the powerful front, led by Zubair and led by Abu Bakr, that they successfully demonstrated was none other than the advancements of the Muslim army. So because of this, the Quraysh hastened away, they quickened away and they retreated towards Mecca. In the Battle of Khandaq, when the Prophet ﷺ asked 3 times, Who will go to Banu Qurayza? It was Zubair who answered all 3 times. The Prophet declared, every Prophet has a disciple, and my disciple is Zubair. When Banu Qurayza siege lasted a long period of time without their surrender, the Prophet ﷺ sent with them Ali ibn Abi Talib. There in front, the fortress, they stood. And they repeated several times, by Allah, we will taste what Hamza tasted, or we will open their fortress. Then they too alone threw themselves into the fortress. They told themselves, they stood on this fortress, the fortress of the Yahud, and they said, they will taste what Hamza, when Hamza died as a shaheed, they will taste what Hamza tasted, or we will open their fortress. With admirable strong nerves, they were able to terrify the besieged inside and open its gates. On the day of Hunayn, he could see Malik ibn Auf, the leader of the Hawazin and the polytheist army. After his defeat in Hunayn, standing in the midst of some of his companions and the remnants of his defeated army, he burst alone into their midst, single-handedly scattered them and pushed them away from the place that they set to ambush the Muslims. So Zubair was skilled in many fronts. So let's kind of take a step back and who was Zubair, right? Let's give a little bit of a description in our heads. Zubair was, for a lack of a better words, he was a tank. He was a unit. He was a monster amongst the Muslim ranks. One of the strongest amongst the Sahabah, alongside Khalid bin Walid, of course, alongside Abu Bakr and Umar ibn Khattab. But he was very skilled in dual wielding 2 swords. So he was designated as one of 2 horsemen in one of the previous battles, because so that with his skill set, he was able to penetrate the Muslim armies. He was able to penetrate the enemy lines, the enemy forces, with 2 swords on horseback, slicing through the lines. Like how the courage he displayed here. And on the day of Al-Yarmouk, Zubair was an army himself. When he saw most of the warriors under his command moving backwards against the advancing Roman armies, right? So on the Yarmouk, there's a passage with mountains, and in the distance you would see mountains upon mountains of the Romans. And the Romans at the time was a superpower. And who were the Muslims? Who were the Arabs? Some tribal nomads, in some desert. When it came to numbers, they were unmatched against the Romans, against the Byzantines. But in the face of the mountains of the Romans, what did Zubair do? He advanced forward on horseback with a sharp striking sword. He burst alone, advancing into the mountains, and then retreating, and then penetrating the same horrible rows with a sword in his right hand, left hand, never slipping or tripping. May Allah be pleased with him, who has so much love with martyrdom, full of enthusiasm for dying in the cause of Allah. He said Allah gives his sons names of the prophets, and he knows there is no prophet after Muhammad ﷺ. But I give my sons the name of martyrs, so that they may die as martyrs one day. In this way, he chose for his sons the names of martyrs, hoping that they would also die as martyrs. It is mentioned that in his biography that he never held governorship, nor the task of collecting tax or tribute, or any form of governorship within the the Muslim state. But his only task was fighting in the cause of Allah. His merit as a warrior can be seen in his total self-reliance, his complete self-confidence. Even if 100,000 warriors were to join him in combat, you would still see him fighting alone. You would still see him fighting as if standing alone in the battlefield, as if the responsibility of fighting for the victory of Allah, fighting for this deen, for the deen of Allah, the deen of Rasoolullah rested on him alone. That was the mindset Zubair had, as if he had to shoulder that himself. His merit as a warrior is represented in his firmness and the strength of his nerves. So I want to take a step back. We hope to attain a sliver of this of this mindset that Zubair endowed upon themselves. That they took this covenant of La ilaha illallah so seriously, they understood what that really meant. That no matter what was placed in front of them, against them, around them, it was as if they shouldered this responsibility of carrying this deen, this light of Islam upon humanity, as if they were the only ones carrying it. And that's how we see the courage, that's how we see the strength and the resilience of the Sahabah of Zubair. And despite his closeness to the Prophet ﷺ, I want to take a step and comment on his humility and of his character. Zubair narrated very few hadith, and you kind of may find this surprising. He was very close to Zubair, even to Muhammad ﷺ, even at a young age, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. You would think that he would be, a treasury of hadith, a treasury of this knowledge, and he would narrate many hadith. But when he was asked why did he narrate very few hadith, he mentioned he heard the Messenger of Allah say, "Whoever lies about me intentionally, let him prepare his seat in the fire." Out of fear of misquoting, he chose silence. His taqwa outweighed the temptation of fame that he could endure from this. He was also very generous, often lending money to others and never keeping wealth for himself or for long. By his death, he had many debts, but not from greed, but from giving. He instructed his son Abdullah, "If you cannot repay my debts, seek help from my Lord." Now, imagine, look at the taqwa in this. Even in death, even after leaving this world, seek help from my Lord. Miraculously, the debts were repaid, and his family left with wealth, though he himself never enjoyed in that wealth. During the turmoil of the assassination of Uthman, Zubair found himself drawn into conflict. Now, I want to take kind of the story to kind of towards the end of his life. Initially, Zubair prepared to fight. But when reminded of the Prophet's prophecy, of the Prophet's saying, "You will one day fight Adi, and you will be in the wrong," he withdrew. He prayed alone. And when he was praying alone, he was treacherously murdered by Ibn Jurmuz. He was stabbed in Salah. And the Prophet ﷺ had foretold that, "Give glad tidings of Jahannam, give glad tidings of hellfire to the one who kills Ibn Safiya." What are some lessons we can take from his life? Right? Number one, strength through upbringing. His mother's vision, Safiya's vision, shaped his destiny. Parents, to those who have children in this room, I want to direct this towards you, and inshallah meet in the future. But parents must raise the tarbiyah of a parent is crucial for the upbringing of a child. We look, with the harsh environment of Mecca, his mother Safiya raised him very harshly. But that attributed to his strength, his resilience, and his understanding, and his character. Number two, the immediate response to Allah's call. Whenever the Prophet ﷺ asked, Zubair was the first to rise. We must ask ourselves, how quickly do we respond to Allah's commands, and of course to our capabilities, but even to the call of Salah, we hear the adhan. How quickly are we to arise to that call 5 times a day? Zubair was the first to rise to this call whenever the Prophet ﷺ asked. And because of this, he was given the name of the Prophet's disciple. Number 3, courage but balanced by obedience. Though fearless, he restrained himself. And when commanded, he restrained himself when commanded. Through strength, true strength is not recklessness, but it's discipline. And we see this throughout many examples within his life, throughout his battles. But, what does this mean? True strength is not recklessness. We look at Zubair. Would we deem him as reckless? Let me go back to the beginning of his life. He was 15 years old, right? And this is the early stages of the dawah. Logically, we would think that it's reckless It's illogical. It's ridiculous to do what Zubair did. 15, a boy, to raise a steel, to raise a sword against the Quraysh. When the rumor came out that Muhammad ﷺ was captured and was to be killed, we would think that this is reckless. But again, we want to take this back. This discipline, this having this firm iman, this covenant of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, that knowing to whom you return to and to whom you come from is in the hands of Allah, and you do whatever is in your capability. And yes, we kind of looked at to that today. Yes, like Zubair, in that time, we don't have protection, we don't have security now as Muslims. And like I mentioned before, we don't have the shield or imam to protect us, to protect our brothers and sisters overseas. But we see the best of us, the true lions of the Ummah, like Zubair, are standing not in recklessness, but in discipline against his falsehood, against his corruption, against the enemies of Islam persecuting them. Number 4, humility and taqwa. He avoided narrating hadith out of fear of misrepresentation. His caution teaches us integrity in speech, and to touch upon accepting truth when it is clear. To go back towards the end of Zubair's life, he accepted truth when it was clear. What does that mean? As we know, a war was about to break out between Ali and Zubair, because Ali did not agree to his point of the view that the rebels at that time should be brought to justice. Ali wanted Zubair radiallahu anh, and others to wait until this turmoil passed, was over, so that they could distinguish the murderers in this time. A war was about to break out, and both men met face to face again, Ali and Zubair. They wanted to meet together to discuss the situation and find out a solution instead of spilling blood. As brothers, to talk instead of spilling blood. Ali met with Zubair and reminded him of his past days, when he walked with Muhammad ﷺ, when the Prophet ﷺ was still alive. And he said, "Don't you remember, Zubair? Don't you remember when the Prophet ﷺ was walking with you? And when I met you, didn't he tell you that you will unjustly fight against me?" Immediately, upon hearing that, Zubair immediately left the battle scene and went back to Mecca. And when he left, in this duration, when he left back, the traitors, he was killed. He was killed during Salah when he went back to Mecca. And these murderers, these killers that killed Zubair, went to Ali to report that, "Oh, we killed Zubair," hoping that it was a good act. The killers thought that they had done something good. They came to Ali, and with this news, Ali was indeed, he was very sad. He prayed to Allah that those who killed Zubair who killed him. He prayed to Allah to punish those who killed Zubair. And Zubair was buried on the way from Iraq to Mecca. Ali said, "May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gather us in Jannah." This was the end of the noble man who spent all his life fighting for the cause of Allah. May Allah bestow His mercy on Zubair for his services towards Islam and the Muslims. Zubair Ibn Al-Awwam radiallahu anhu was a man of courage, was a man of faith, was a man of loyalty. He was a cousin to the Prophet of Allah, the son of Safiya, the husband of Asma bint Abu Bakr, and the disciple of the Messenger, and one of the 10 promised Jannah. From his childhood in Mecca to his sword raised in defense of the Prophet ﷺ, in his bravery in Badr, in Uhud, in the battles, his life was a lesson for us all. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with Zubair, and may we learn from his courage, his patience, and his devotion. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.